The Big Ten is a really old conference. They've been playing football in the Big Ten since the late 1890s. You heard that right, the 1890s, not the 1990s. Over 125 years ago, the Big Ten was founded, and they've been playing football ever since. And during that long period, they've had a lot of time to build some bad blood between some of those teams. There's more historic rivalries in the Big Ten than any other conference. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the rivalries in the Big Ten, and we're going to rate them on a tier list. We're going to use the exact same tier names that we used in the SEC rivalries tier list video, which is fever pitch, the peak of a rivalry. It's reached peak relevance, peak hate, peak everything. Boiling point, where the rivalry's been really great. It's been back and forth recently. Heated rivalries, there's a lot of history and tradition there, but maybe just hasn't had the recent, movement you'd like to see in a rivalry game like that. Needs a spark, still a great rivalry, just needs something to happen to catalyze it moving to a higher tier. And then on simmer, a rivalry game that has just lacked juice for one reason or another in the past however many years it's been. This is the current state of these rivalries. Some of these rivalries might be historically better or worse, but this is just the current state, how it currently is, how things are going. Have there been recent swings? Have the games been relevant? And how much does it mean to these fan bases? So let's get into the list. We start at the bottom tier, which is on simmer. We've got Iowa versus Minnesota, Rutgers versus Maryland, Michigan versus Minnesota, and Nebraska versus Minnesota. What you're looking at here is a couple of rivalries where Minnesota just cannot buy a rivalry win. Michigan and Iowa have dominated the series versus Minnesota recently, and it just hasn't allowed much of a spark to ignite. And then there's Nebraska-Minnesota, which is Nebraska can't buy a win versus Minnesota. It's the other way around. So just some extremely one-sided, albeit very historical rivalries. And then Rutgers versus Maryland, which sticks out like a sore thumb. Definitely the worst rivalry in this conference. Geographically, it makes some sense for sure, but it's felt completely fabricated. These teams don't have a lot of history versus each other, and it's just not one that is ignited with a big spark when you see them play, or it feels like these teams don't like each other. It's just a pretty mundane, forced rivalry. Jumping up to the next tier, we have needs a spark. We've got 5 rivalry games in this tier, and some of them may surprise you because some of these are high-profile games. You've got Oregon v. USC, Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, Penn State. Those are all big games that have had huge implications between big brands, but they really, truthfully, are just rivalry games that haven't really been played enough. They don't have the historic nature that some of these other rivalry games have. Penn State is still carving out their Big Ten presence. I know they've been in it for most of your guys' lifetimes, but they were an independent team for a long time, and historically they weren't playing Ohio State and Michigan every year. That's only been a thing since they've joined the Big Ten, and there's been some high stakes matchups, there's been some big time matchups between those teams, but you get the sense that when the game is not nationally relevant, it doesn't feel quite like a true rivalry game. And I know that might be something that drives people crazy or rubs them the wrong way. I know there's going to be 100% people saying that Ohio State, Penn State is one of the best rivalries because it's one of the highest stakes games in the Big Ten every year. But I'm telling you, when the national implications aren't there in that game, you don't feel any sort of rivalry juice. And that's just because it's not historically a rivalry enough. I think that's building. I think that it's going to continue to move in that direction, but I just think it needs a little bit more of an oomph, especially with those teams, Michigan and Michigan State and Ohio State. You've got Michigan versus Michigan State in here as well. This one is one of the best rivalries in the Big Ten when both teams are winning, but recently Michigan has gone on a nice streak where they're in firm control of it. So Michigan State's going to have to do something to sort of even the playing field here. We've got Oregon versus USC, which was the one I talked about a little bit earlier, but basically with that rivalry game, it's not a traditional rivalry either, and also the Ducks have been in firm control of that series recently, and so there isn't much of something there, but the longer these teams play in the Big Ten and are one of their only West Coast opponents each other play season after season, I think we'll see that one start to grow a little bit. USC just needs to get back on their feet. The next tier is going to be heated rivalries. These are rivalry games where it goes back and forth, it has the history, there is hatred. You don't need national implications for these games to matter for these teams. You've got a couple of them with Indiana involved. Indiana versus Illinois, Indiana versus Northwestern, Indiana versus Michigan State. In all of those ones, it's been historically very one-sided because Indiana is historically a poverty program. However, Indiana has actually thrown some counterpunches recently and won some games in each of those series, and it started to heat them up a little bit. A rivalry that you feel like hasn't been as relevant as it could be is starting to sort of heat up a little bit, and that's why they're here in the heated territory. We've got Purdue versus Illinois, a little bit overlooked by the casuals among you who aren't aware this is a rivalry, but it is, and they've had some great finishes recently. It's a regional one that really means a lot to both of these programs, between the team in the state of Indiana and the team in the state of Illinois. And then we've got Iowa versus Nebraska. It's been very one-sided recently, but the difference has been Nebraska's been very competitive in these games. They've got so many one-score losses, and also you get the sense it's one of those games that could make or break a Nebraska fan season or an Iowa fan season, just because there is definitely some bad blood there, and both teams think they have better corn. The next tier here is going to be the boiling point tier. We've got 3 games in here. These are rivalry games where it's peak hatred. It is one of the biggest games of these team seasons, no matter what is going on with their program, and it's something that we look forward to near the end of the year every single season. Wisconsin versus Iowa was a huge matchup that shaped the Big Ten West for a long time there, and both of these teams have delivered some nice blows to each other over the last couple of seasons. And when you're talking recent national relevance, Wisconsin and Iowa have been in that picture. They've been the teams that have been not the Ohio States and Michigans of the world, but near the top 25. So there's been some relevant matchups between these guys on top of the hatred for each other, on top of the fact that it's a big-time rivalry game, and that has really enhanced this one a lot, even though traditionally it's not going to be Wisconsin's biggest rival, and Iowa might consider Nebraska to be a bigger rival, or Iowa State to be a bigger rival. We've also got Purdue versus Indiana and Northwestern versus Illinois, which are going to be 2 very intense Big Ten rivalries, 2 of them that are played at the end of the season during rivalry week. There's no mistaking who each of these teams' biggest rivals are. Purdue's biggest rival is Indiana. Indiana's biggest rival is Purdue. Northwestern's biggest rival is Illinois. Illinois' biggest rival is Northwestern. And that is the beauty of these types of games. I'm a sucker for when it is in-state. But on top of that, it's just been some competitive back and forth, especially recently between all those teams. And that's something that I think really enhances it when you have that back and forth. Northwestern had a long streak there against Illinois. Illinois starting to get them back. And so you really feel the bad blood when these teams match up. You really feel all of the rivalry intensity that comes with it. And so for that reason, these games definitely at a boiling point. And then finally, we've reached the top tier, which is a fever pitch. There's 4 rivalry games on here. Some you probably expected, maybe a few that might surprise you. We start with Michigan versus Ohio State. I think this has been the best rivalry game in college football over the last 5 years and going still. And there's some fantastic rivalries in college football, obviously. It's called the lifeblood of the sport for a reason. There are some fantastic ones going on. But the storylines, the way Michigan has won as an underdog several years in a row, the way Ohio State dominated this rivalry before that, it's just been an insane thing to watch. And it's a rare case of when a rivalry game has on a 4 or 5 game streak with a different team, and yet it still feels extremely intense because it's been the underdog each time, and it's been the same team each time. Michigan just has Ohio State's number, despite the fact the Buckeyes have routinely been the better team, except for Michigan won a national title in 2023. So there's national implications too, on top of the hatred, on top of the fact that Ohio State just won a national title this last year, and yet a lot of people are still talking about that loss to Michigan. That's how you know how much that game means, and it really just shows what the antithesis of college football is, which is rivalry game. You want to win your rivalry game above many other things, sometimes above even a national title. Washington versus Oregon is a fantastic Northwest rivalry that has definitely been sparked recently by some big-time wins from Washington in this series, and the Ducks, no matter how good they become, it feels like they can't ditch the Washington Huskies. They are just right there. They're relevant, and this is the best West Coast rivalry arguably on this list, because we've also got UCLA and USC on here, which is another fantastic imported rivalry from the Pac-12. A huge battle between 2 programs that are very proud, have had plenty of successes, have had national titles, have had great seasons, and yet it's still a game that means a lot at the end of the year. This last season, USC was 5-6, UCLA was 5-6, and yet when they matched up at the end of the year, you got the feeling it was a big-time game for both of those teams, and ones they really cared about. There was always a infectious atmosphere, and it's a big deal when teams are in the same state playing each other, but the same city battling for LA. That's pretty cool, even though I know technically UCLA is in Pasadena. It's a really fun thing. And then, of course, we've got Wisconsin versus Minnesota, which is just an impeccable rivalry. There's no need for any sort of national implications in this game. It's just 2 teams that very much do not like each other. They are each other's biggest rivals. They match up at the end of every season, and when they do, it's pure cinema. It's just peak everything you would want to see in a rivalry game, and I think a very underrated rivalry because it's one of the ones that doesn't necessarily have the giant national implications. It's awesome. It's a rivalry I love, and that's why it's in the fever pitch tier. But that does it for this tier list of Big Ten rivalries. Let me know down in the comments, which rivalry do you think I'm overrating or underrating based on the current state of the rivalry? Maybe you think I'm missing one. There might be an extra one that you consider a rivalry that other people don't, or maybe one that you just straight up think is a rivalry and I missed. Let me know down in the comments all that stuff. We'll be doing the Big 12 and the ACC for this also later in the week. So maybe if you're thinking ahead to those, some rivalries you think are underappreciated in those series. But I appreciate you guys for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Some of you might not be subscribed and you might not realize it, so just double check that for me. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you guys later this week.